I don't want other athletes to go through what I went through in terms of that devastation, in terms of loss, in terms of helplessness.
Welcome to The Quiet Tension. I'm your host, Dr. Sharon Chirban. In this show, we explore what's happening beneath high performance, the part that drives you, shapes you, and sometimes pulls at you too. Through conversations with leaders, athletes, and creatives, we push past the surface and into what it really takes to perform at that level. Today, we're with Katie Uhlaender, 5-time Olympian and one of the most accomplished skeleton athletes in American history. Katie has won 33 major international medals across her career, remarkable for someone who only found her sport at the relatively late age of 19. But Katie's story doesn't end with competition. After more than 2 decades inside the Olympic movement, she has also become an advocate for athletes and women in sport, with a growing interest in policy and the systems that shape fair competition. So I wanted to find out what happened between discovering the sport and it becoming her entire life.
The way I was introduced to the sport was purely through curiosity and that youthful zeal to discover things in life. So I was very adventurous. And when someone showed me what skeleton was, I was terrified, but it looked like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So I said, sure, I'll try it. And I crashed, I think like day 3. I flipped over and got back onto my sled and something clicked. And I don't know if it's that thing that people talk about. I think it might have been where you get into the zone. And it felt like I was watching myself from above and also experiencing everything at the same time in like the best way. I was hyper aware of my surroundings. Everything was flowing easily and it was exhilarating. Like I'd come out of the corners and feel the speed. I could visualize where I wanted to go, even though I had no idea what I was doing. And that feeling that overcame me and where I felt one with the sled, it was like I was flying in a dream. And when I finished, I was like, I don't know what that was, but I want more of it.
I think a lot of athletes would want to know more about being in the zone. Had you ever experienced that with anything else before skeleton?
I would say yes, but in different situations. And what I loved about skeleton is that when I got into that zone, there was no requirement for me to verbalize anything. And everything was happening so fast that I could just rely on my instincts. And for me personally, that's an environment I thrive in. And this sport highlighted that. I could prep and think as much as I wanted to, analyze, and then I could find that space where I could instinctively chase the speed, go with gravity. I described it as relaxed chaos. And even though I was seeing myself from a bird's eye view, it was very somatic. Like I could taste the air. I could like feel my stomach in my throat when I popped out of the curves. But everything was one with me. Like the sounds, the feeling of the ice, the smell of the ice, because your face is just an inch off of it. And it all kind of contributed to a certain awareness that I think helped me grow as a person. It's almost like a meditative state.
I'm not an expert on this, but my perception is that it's very much a kinesthetic sport. It's something you do by feel, even more than vision, right? Like it's your body feeling the turn. Tell me more about that. Like when you're going down the track, how much do you rely on strategy and how much do you rely on feel?
If I could answer that question clearly, I would have the key to the sport. So I will do my best. A lot of people joke that it's like Yoda. You kind of will yourself to places. But I think you nailed it. It's kinesthetic. So it's a momentum sport, which is velocity times mass. And you have to reduce friction because you're not going straight downhill. You're going through curves. Sometimes you go uphill. And where I think I lucked out is that instinctively I knew how to gain momentum. If I overthought it, like if the perfect line and the fastest way down are not necessarily the same, which is something a lot of the athletes struggle with because they think, oh, well, if I don't hit any walls and I go through at this angle at this perfect line, I'm going to be fast. But you could have two athletes come through with lines that look the same and one's faster than the other. And the best way to explain that is tension in the body. So a person that's relaxed and becoming as much dead weight as possible is going to be faster than someone who's tense, right? So if you're anticipating too much and you're oversteering or putting too much pressure in, you're creating friction. And the caveat to that is sometimes you want to create tension because that creates pressure in a different point of the curve. So there are a lot of technical aspects. Like you could probably sit down with a scientist and analyze exactly where you should be tense, where you should be calm, how to steer, when. And then you have people that just do it instinctively. And I think some coaches in our sport refer to that too as the magic. Like there are people that possess the ability to do that and people that don't. You could have the fastest sprinter in the world come do skeleton and they might not ever get the feeling of it.
Katie has a phrase for it, relaxed chaos. I find myself still thinking about that. Most of us learn that tension is the enemy. Relax, calm down, unclench. What she tells us is that too much tension and you slow down, and not enough tension and you can't steer. The skill isn't relaxing and it isn't gripping. It's knowing the difference the second the curve delivers you the moment that asks for it. She's describing how she races. 90 miles an hour, her face an inch off the ice, holding the right amount of tension as everything comes at her all at once. And listening back to this whole conversation, I don't think she knows yet how much of her life she's also describing. So hold on to that phrase, relaxed chaos, because we're coming back to it. So Katie's instinct for sport didn't come from nowhere. Her father was a Major League Baseball player. He underscored the importance of thinking for yourself. Her history, deeper than that, also shaped the way that she thinks about autonomy and making decisions for yourself.
My grandfather told me that he didn't agree with the German movement, and so he left and he went to America. And during World War II, that was a big deal because he was a 6'5" German captain that couldn't speak English. So he was basically hiding. And my dad reiterated that story through sport and told me that it was always my choice, that I didn't have to listen to my coaches or people that told me what to do. He told me if I was running to third and the third base coach told me to go and I made it home and scored, it was the team win. If he told me to stop and I didn't and I ran home, it was still a team win. But if he told me to go and I got out, that was my choice, that I could have stopped at third if I wanted to. So he told me to take accountability and responsibility for all my choices, no matter what authority or coach told me what to do. And it really shaped my curiosity moving forward in sport and in life. So it hurt me and it helped me because I was never shy when someone told me to do something to ask why. And some people take offense to that, but I genuinely wanted to protect my integrity and understand why.
One other question that comes to mind. So dad's a baseball player, which is a team sport, and you end up finding your niche in an individual sport. Do you think some of that historical, the folklore, right, of your family about making fierce, independent decisions, sticking with your gut, being accountable. Do you think that served you as an individual athlete?
Absolutely. I wasn't opposed to team sports. I think that women have less opportunity in team sports. They're very, very hard to find. And I played men's baseball, actually, because of that. So growing up, the women's softball team wasn't as competitive. They didn't have as organized or structured practices. So I played with the boys' team because it was more challenging. And thanks to Title IX, I had that opportunity because baseball and softball are different sports. They had to let me play. So that's the only time that a woman can play in a men's league is when they aren't offered the same opportunities. So I'd like to think that if I had the opportunity, I could have gone to the Olympics in softball. But to find the opportunities to do that, it's a lot harder for women. And I feel blessed that the tenacity that my father gave me led me to the sport of skeleton in 5 Olympic Games.
Do you remember when you first thought, like, wow, I'm an Olympian?
I didn't grow up doing my sport or think I'm going to be an Olympian from when I was a kid. That wasn't my goal. I genuinely got swept away by the love of the game. I did become a product of the system, which is the moment when your identity is synonymous with being an Olympian. Luckily, it wasn't for too long, but it happened. And that was when my father died in 2009. Days before the World Championship, the media wanted to exploit that story. And I told my federation that I didn't want to do press, that I didn't want to be a part of it. And what I was told is that it would help the team if I talked to the media and I helped the story grow, because it was big and it would draw attention to the sport. And that was the second time I felt I had set aside my own needs to do what the sport wanted. And the first time was when my father was dying. I asked to go home 3 times, and they told me that I couldn't because they needed me to perform or the funding for the team would be cut. So it put a lot of responsibility on my shoulders, and I wasn't able to be there when my father passed. And then on top of that, I was asked to talk about his death and what it meant to me and the Olympics. I never really had a private moment to kind of nourish what brought me to the sport. It kind of set me at an opposition of like, well, the love of the sport cost me a moment with my dad as he was passing. And a sense of duty obligated me to do that. And it took some growth and some therapy to realize that that wasn't right. And that's one of those moments that we could refer back to where I did what they said and I shouldn't have.
So for you, really what you're describing is this is when you got defined by the system and you started to feel the constraint of a system. And so Olympian to you isn't just like, this is what I do. This is the definition you're describing is more about how being an Olympian had both guardrails up, but as well as constraints that you experienced some losses around.
Yeah, deep losses. And I don't want to take away from the parts of it that helped me grow as a human being, which I think is what drew me to being an Olympian, was the pursuit of excellence, discovering parts of myself that I didn't know were capable of facing such challenges at such a high level with so much pressure, combined with the pride of being Ted Uhlander's daughter, United States of America athlete. Like, those things are real and they're amazing. And sport does such a great job to inspire others and to promote the pursuit of excellence. And I think that that's my purpose. That's what drew me to it. And that's more of what I circulate my identity around is the pursuit of excellence and learning. I really, really love to learn. But it did get convoluted at a point where there was an expectation that didn't include those things. It included me to set aside my humanity to a certain extent, the part of me that made me human, to do things that would help the team.
5 Olympic Games means over 20 years training at this elite level. What part of normal life over 20 years had to go on the shelf and sort of be on the sidelines?
I don't know what normal life is. All of it, I have no idea. I think compared to other Olympic athletes, I have definitely gone against the grain, which is I guess, normal for my personality. But I took time to work on the TV show Survivor and worked at a functional neurology clinic for 4 years. I tried to diversify my time. But in all those instances, I was never able to settle, right? Because our sport was on tour 6 months of the year. So even when I worked on Survivor, I would go there for 2 or 3 months, come back, train in Lake Placid for 2 or 3 months, and then go on tour for 6 months. I met Stu McMillan, my coach through the sport, Dan Papp. I've maintained so many amazing friendships and mentorships. But in terms of a boyfriend, that's tough. I'm that's the only part of me that's if I hadn't done this, would I have kids and a husband right now and a home? And I think that kind of correlates to Robert Frost's poem about the road less taken. That's yours. But at some point, I think every human being stops and thinks about, what if I had taken that other path? I think it's normal. But would I trade the experiences I've had, living in Fiji, Cook Islands, Europe, Canada, going to the Olympics in China during COVID? That was crazy. Seeing Pavarotti sing his last live performance in Italy, I cried. I held a stranger's hand and was like, "Are you hearing this?" And they looked at me and they were thinking the same thing. It created such a connection to other human beings and cultivated a lot of love, which I think is the purpose of life.
So what I hear is grief without regret. Katie talks about the life she lived, embraces it fully. She wouldn't trade a minute of it. While at the same time, she speaks quite honestly about the cost. A partner, a home, the life that might have included children. That's the piece I don't often hear elite athletes say out loud. That choosing one life doesn't fully erase the other lives. There does exist a shadow. Part of the interior work of high performance is learning to live alongside those shadows, not denying them, but also not letting them define you. Aside your dad's death in 2009, a few other things caught up with you, it seems, between 2010 and 14. And I think you referred to losing your friend, who's also a skeleton athlete. Is that right? Holcomb?
No, Steve Holcomb was an Olympic gold medalist in bobsleigh.
In bobsleigh. Okay.
Yes. I mean, Holcomb and I were especially tight. I started in 2003 and he started, I think, in 2001. So fairly early on in our careers, we became really good friends. And I think I just became his annoying little sister, to be honest. I basically came into the system as a kid. I was 19. Holcomb was 20, I think, when he got involved. And I don't know how it happened, but we started drinking. And I, it's I guess every other college kid, you do your phase of experimentation. But I didn't realize that it had become a problem because he was still performing. And I also was kind of in an awkward position because my father had just died. I was devastated, asking for help, for mental health help, obviously struggling myself. And I was told that I needed to perform, whether that was through interviews or racing. I needed to perform, and that was all that mattered. And so it was difficult for me to differentiate seeing him struggle as well and realizing how severe it was. I think a week before he passed, when it was his birthday and we were hanging out, we were watching Pee Wee Herman, one of his favorite movies. And I was having wine. but he wasn't. And I was like, why aren't you drinking? And he said, because if I start, I can't stop. And I was like, what do you mean? Because that's like, I didn't understand. That was the first time I had heard him admit that there was a challenge there. And then he told me that's why he wasn't drinking. And I said, okay, well, I'll support you in that. But unfortunately, he went to the NBC promotional shoot, did an interview with Brett Ratkin, who's the director for the HBO film we ended up doing, The Weight of Gold. And when he got back, he essentially just drank himself to death.
So what I'm sitting with is that Holcomb told his story openly, even with tears almost brimming in his eyes. And there's a profound sense of loss that despite sharing his story openly with people who really did appreciate mental health, and that was the purpose of the documentary, that he still got missed. And Katie was in the room with him. There is a weight to that the people around him heard the story and yet still didn't know how much he was struggling. Tell us a little bit about the HBO Weight of Gold, because I believe it was a catalyst for lots of change that came after that.
I'm proud to have been a part of it, and I told Phelps this, but I hope he hears this, and I'll say it again. Thank you, because he helped. I might cry a little. Phelps did not have to do what he did. He created a platform. Sorry.
Take a minute. Yeah.
I know I'm emotional because I know Phelps went through his own struggles. Actually, everyone in that film did. But it meant so much. I want to say thank you to Michael Phelps for creating that platform to draw attention to the environment and the mental health struggles that we all face. It's not just athletes. We just happen to be in a higher pressure environment, and one that puts a higher value on our performance than who we are at times. And to have had him create that platform and invite so many top name athletes to come speak as well, it had such a huge impact. And it got the United States Olympic Committee to strengthen their mental health services. They have a long way to go, don't get me wrong, but it started to break the stigma a little bit, I hope. And I think even though I don't know that everyone knows what to do when there is a mental health problem or distress, it at least created a space to start talking about it. And that's huge. And it could save lives.
Mm. What do you think makes this particularly emotional for you?
I've lost 3 friends. All like in sport. Speedy and I weren't like as close as Holcomb and I were, but I stayed at his house weeks at a time. And one of his roommates was one of my teammates, Billy Schiffenhauer. It was a tight group, and Speedy took his life, and Holcomb, and then my friend Pavle. And the thing that just strikes me is that Speedy had an Olympic silver medal, seemed to be doing well financially. Holcomb was Olympic champion and then had won multiple other medals, was doing well financially. And it was mind-blowing. Like, you'd think their dreams were made. And one thing Holcomb told me is he felt like nobody cared. I never talked or knew that Speedy was struggling as much as he was, but it was still that made it more of a shock. And in both cases, I wish they had the space to talk more about it or get help. I wish that I had known what to do in the face of like substance abuse or depression. And with Pavle as well. He was a retired athlete when he did it, but he dedicated his life to sport. And I think part of what added to Pavle's depression was that he also felt like nobody cared. You dedicate your life to something, and if you're not winning, you don't matter. And that's a common theme in the movie. And it does, like, it's not something that doesn't cross my mind at times. I went to 5 Olympics. I missed out on a medal due to a doping scandal and missed out on making history this last go round. And there is a perspective that's like, oh, you went 5 times and you didn't medal. You are blocking the development of the sport. You're taking away resources from the up and coming athletes. And it shouldn't be like that. Like, I went to 5 Olympic Games. I represented the United States of America. I inspired people. And to have some of the Olympic Committee and my federation say that I was blocking others or taking resources from them makes me feel like the system has not caught up with the mental health services that they're trying to provide, because an environment like that is hostile.
So that line, if you're not winning, you don't matter, is so loaded for me. What Katie's describing is the objectification of athletes. It's where they feel like objects that can be replaced. And that happens at every level of Olympic sport, even if you've been to the games 5 times. In many high-performance cultures that I've worked in, it's a pretty common theme. And the burden on the performer is that they need to be able to separate that who they are isn't what they do. And that collapses when the system does precisely that, objectify them. And so I think what we're hearing through these devastating stories is that despite the medal, despite the career, that identity that was built during those years of performance starts to wobble when that career is over. And in some cases, there's a full collapse. For anyone listening who may be struggling or worried about someone they love, you don't have to carry this alone. In the US and Canada, you can call or text 988 for immediate crisis support. We'll also include resources in the show notes. So that question about whether or not athletes are valued as whole people shaped how Katie understood one of the greatest injustices in her career: missing a bronze medal due to the Russian doping scandal.
At the Sochi Olympics, that was my 3rd Olympic Games. I went into that year 2nd in the world. I had medaled on the Olympic track. And in the qualifying rounds in October, I got a concussion that was quite severe. I ended up going to a functional neurology clinic to get treated for post-concussion syndrome a few weeks before the games. And while I was there, I met some combat veterans, and they put a lot into perspective, to say the least. You know, you show up and feeling sorry for yourself, like, oh, this always happens. I'm always injured. Woe's me. I'm not going to get to medal again. And I see these guys and I'm like, hey, what happened to you? And they're like, oh, I got blown up. And then they're like, you? I was like, oh, I hit my head sledding. And they're like, are you going to the Olympics? So I was like, yeah, in a couple weeks. Are you still fighting? Or like, are you getting deployed? And they also were going to be deployed again after they finished their treatment. And it made me realize that if they could go fight for our country and be going through the same treatment I was and some of the same struggles, that I could absolutely go to Russia and represent the United States of America with the best that I had to offer, even if it was damaged. And I did that. I have to say, I was fired up for the USA. And I told those guys, you know, despite the exploitation or the controversies of war, what you do matters. And you've inspired me, and I'm going to go kick some Russian butt in Russia. And I did. I brought everything I had. I put it all out on the line. And Stu McMillan was my coach at the time. And he knew how bad the concussion was. Like, I was still struggling, but I honed it in. And man, I was so close. I missed a medal by 400ths of a second. That's quicker than you can blink, to put it in perspective. And it was over 4 miles, so 4 runs. 400ths is like, I took a breath at the wrong time, you know? But I left proud. I left proud of my country. I left proud of how I represented it. And a year later, the McLaren report comes out, and they reported Russia had a statewide doping scandal where they provided performance-enhancing drugs to all their athletes. And the woman who beat me by 400ths was Russian and named in the McLaren report. So essentially, it took a long time. It was going into the 18 Olympics. I think it was November 2017. They stripped the medals of Russia, and I was being awarded a bronze. And that was amazing, that feeling. I was like, is this real? You know, like we had even had meetings discussing how we would do the award ceremony. I remember Governor Perry, who was at the Carrick Brain Centers where I got treated, was like, if you get that medal, we're going to celebrate. And, you know, I let everybody know. And when I arrived at the Olympic Games in Korea, I had hate mail and on social media that notified me that the medal had been given back to Russia. The Olympic Committee didn't tell me. I went to the processing and got interviewed, and they were like, how does it feel to be a bronze medalist? And I had to be the one to be like, well, actually, as of like a few hours ago, I don't have it.
How did that make you feel?
Shocked. Because you start to realize that winning sometimes is more than talent. It's more than hard work. The hard work, the effort, the journey, how much you learn, nobody can take that from you. In terms of the rules and how the game is played, that takes advocacy. That takes a different kind of work. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about athlete rights now.
I still wonder what the feeling was that fuels the advocacy.
It definitely hurts. And it's to articulate that is difficult because you almost feel like a kid and you're like, am I supposed to do something? Like, aren't the adults in the room supposed to have figured this out already? And it's part of growing up to realize that the system, your coaches, the adults in the room know as much as you do half the time. And not to say that you know more, just to say that maybe we're all guessing, and it's important to find a constructive way to communicate your needs and not just accept what's given to you if it's wrong. And I think I don't want other athletes to go through what I went through in terms of that devastation, in terms of loss, in terms of helplessness. It felt helpless when my father was dying and I couldn't go see him, or Holcomb passed and I literally couldn't get to him. And not that those are the system's fault, but they're definitely correlated in terms of the environment. So if there's anything, even if it's a small thing, to ensure that athletes can go home to see their family when they're dying, or can get access to help when they're obviously struggling with substance abuse or mental health issues, it's worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like you channel that, whatever we want to call all of those feelings, hurt, angry, confused, like it sounds kind of like a bouquet of emotion, into advocacy. What's at the center of the fairness in women's sport issue that you are passionate about?
Learning is something I love. I love so much. I think part of what's driving my passion for advocacy is, one, why did no one say anything? So I will. And two, I want to do it in a way that is in alignment with who I am and my purpose, which is curiosity. So I have my opinions, I have my hurt, I have my experiences, but in each of those instances, I've asked why. right? I still have respect for the athlete, Nicotina, that got the bronze medal. It's not her fault. She did what she was supposed to do as an athlete. She competed, and she did what her country told her to do. I would like to think that I would be aware enough to take my father's advice and not listen if I knew it was cheating. But I wasn't in that situation. I don't know what I would do if someone said, we'll pay you €100,000 a year. If you win, you'll get a house, you'll get a car, you're set for life. And all you have to do is drink this cocktail. Like, I would like to think I'd say no, but honestly, like, I don't know. And I'm not going to judge her for that.
So you're sitting with the possibility of retirement, but that's also not a clean decision. Can you take us through that?
I was injured last year. My hip was deteriorating, and man, you're never going to stop learning how to advocate for yourself. I had a coach that was pressuring me to train through the pain, and I knew better, but I kept thinking, younger me, it'll hurt for a bit. I'll take the time. I'll recover. Well, let me tell y'all, the tread on the tires gets used up. It does. So, like, you get to your 40s, and you need to be selective about pushing through that pain and avoid it at all costs if you can. It cost me my hip. I lost all the cartilage in my hip. And May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, I had a hip replacement. So as long as this recovery goes well and I can start training, I will potentially attempt a comeback. If I don't get, a full-time job and security and other things, then it makes sense for me to go back to maintain my health insurance opportunities and remind these kids that I was the best this country's ever seen. Because I feel like potentially the injury and the way things went down last year made me feel like they forgot. And I think it'd be fun. I love racing. I love it so much. And I'm not going to lie. Part of what I love is talking ish. So it's an arena where that's all welcomed. And I love sports so much. I really do.
And how would you fill in this blank? The quiet tension for me is
understanding. I'm hopeful through Columbia and my advocacy to open dialogue and even with the athletes, create an understanding that it's not about winning, that it's truly about understanding how you got to where you are and why. And then through that, you create a better path. Which I hope inspires others to do the same. And I think that applies to my approach to my career as an athlete and hopefully my future career in policy.
So I want to bring us back to the phrase I asked you to think about at the beginning, relaxed chaos. She told us it was how she raced. But through this conversation, she took us through these other points in her life. A father dying when she's kept on tour to keep her team alive. A friend who drank himself to death in front of her. Losing a medal to a doping scandal, since she was capable of standing in that relaxed chaos. She could tolerate missing her father's dying days and at the same time do what the team needed from her. So a person who can hold impossible tension is also someone you can keep asking to hold more. And after everything, maybe that's what we can hope for, is that someone can stand in all of that with honesty. So Katie leaves us with the athlete's view of being inside the Olympic system, how much it asks of you, how much it costs you, and at the same time, loving the system and deeply appreciating everything it gave you. Next time, we'll look at the same world from the other side with Dr. Jessica Bartley who's the Director of Mental Health Services for the United States Olympic Paralympic Committee, who's committed to the exact purpose of what it is that Katie took us through. If today's conversation resonated with you, follow the show for more conversations about what lives beneath high performance. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments section below. What part of Katie's story stayed with you? And if you're listening on your favorite podcast app, leave a rating. It helps other people find this show. I'm Dr. Sharon Chirban. Thanks for listening closely.